Tales of the Empire is a very strange and frustrating show. Coming out of Tales of the Jedi, I was pretty excited for this series. I wasn't really too interested in the Morgan Elsbeth storyline, but man, the story of what happened to Barriss Offee post-Clone Wars, that had potential. That was a story I was hoping would eventually get told. And man, now that it has been told, I really wish it hadn't been because the writers really dropped the ball on this one. Like, badly dropped it. They totally fumbled it. Barris's character in Tales of the Empire is so poorly handled that I was actually left wondering by the end of it if the writers of the storyline had actually watched Clone Wars and were familiar with the character's backstory at all. Because almost everything we see Barriss do and say in this show is at odds with what we've previously seen from her and what we know about her character. So before I get into what's wrong with the 3-episode Barriss arc, I'm going to give a very brief summary of Barriss' Season 5 story that ties into Tales of the Empire Part 2. I mean, it barely ties into it really, but whatever. So, Barriss Offee was the Padawan of Jedi Master Luminara Unduli. These two weren't really big players in the Clone Wars show. They appear from time to time in a handful of episodes, primarily with Ahsoka and Barriss teaming up together on some missions. They had a pretty interesting dynamic together, one I wish the Clone Wars show had delved into a bit more deeply than it had. The final story that we saw Barriss in was the Jedi Temple hangar bombing arc in Season 5. This would go on to have big ramifications for both Barriss and Ahsoka. Ahsoka would actually go on to leave the Jedi Order after this. There's a bit more to this story, but the TLDR version is basically that Barriss carried out a bombing on the Jedi Temple hangar that killed several people, and then framed Ahsoka for it. Barriss carried out this bombing because she believed that the Jedi had lost their way and were actually the ones responsible for the war. This was one of my favourite arcs in the show. I remember when I first saw it, I was actually really surprised that the writers had Barriss turn heel. I mean, this was a character we'd seen before and thought was one of the good guys. It was a good twist and really well executed on the show by the writers. So now that we're all caught up, let's get into Barriss' characterization in Tales of the Empire and why it makes absolutely zero sense and stomps all over what we've previously understood about Barriss Offee. From our very first appearance in Tales of the Empire, the Barriss that we're seeing feels like a totally different character from the Barriss we saw in Clone Wars Season 5. The first big difference is that this version of Barriss doesn't really seem to be motivated by her hatred for the Jedi any longer, and if she is motivated by it, we're not really seeing her express any of it. The first episode of this arc literally opens on Order 66, and Barriss has nothing to say about that. We don't get any idea of how she feels about it. Nothing. I think this would be a pretty big deal for her. One of the other things you'll notice about Barriss early on is that she doesn't seem to be influenced by the dark side in the way she was in Season 5. Remember this line.
Should have gotten rid of them!
I think they suit me.
I've always thought that when she said this line, by this point she'd forsaken everything about the Jedi Order. From this point on, she's well on her way to the dark side. I think it's safe to say that when a Jedi starts identifying with the Sith, which is what's implied by what she said by the lightsaber suiting her, I don't think you can put them in the morally grey category anymore. You're kind of committed to the dark side at that point. By dropping this dark side subplot, the writers have now just basically removed the most interesting stuff about Barriss' character, the stuff people wanted to see explored in this story. The omission of these subplots, Barriss' hatred for the Jedi, and her descent to the dark side make Barriss appear, if not as a sympathetic character, at least not an outright evil one, which 100% flies in the face of what we know about her already. And if you're still holding on to the idea that Barriss was originally more conflicted about the loss of lives in the temple bombing, I'll just remind you that the last time we saw Barriss in Season 5, it was her giving a speech about how awful and evil the Jedi are, and how they're the real villains, that they should be the ones put on trial. At no point during this speech does she ever show any remorse or regret for the people she's killed. And why would she? The loss of life was the whole point of her plan, not a byproduct of it. And I haven't even gotten to one of the worst parts of her plan yet. She framed her friend for the bombing and also the murder of her accomplice, Leda Termund. I've seen some pushback to this part of Barriss' plan online, with some people saying that it wasn't really necessary for her to frame Ahsoka, but I always kind of interpreted her framing of Ahsoka as speaking to how far she was gone at this point, and how little she cared about the Jedi, even one that used to be her friend. She didn't just want to commit one act of terrorism against the Jedi and call it a day. No, I think she was going to go on and commit more, and framing Ahsoka was just a smokescreen to remove any accusations from herself. And guess what? She never shows any remorse for this act either. So you're probably starting to see what I'm getting at here. All of this paints a picture of Barriss as an outright evil person with no regrets or remorse about any of the things she's done. So imagine my surprise when, in Tales of the Empire, Baris is not only apprehensive about killing a fellow ex-Jedi who is actively trying to kill her, later on, she's endangering her own life to save one. And this isn't even the part of the series that makes the least amount of sense. In episode 5, she drops this absolute clanger of a line.
Then you have one Jedi left to deal with.
That's right, she's actually identifying as a Jedi now. Did the writers forget about her entire motivation from the Jedi Temple hangar bombing? The last thing I would have ever expected from Barriss Offee of all people after her speech in season 5 was for her to identify as a Jedi ever again. The Jedi are an institution she absolutely despises. More than anything, this totally flies in the face of what we know about her. This makes no sense. And you can say, oh well, the difference in Barriss's character can be explained away. She's had time to think about what she did while she was imprisoned, and she regrets her actions now. She's a different person. And to that I say, okay, that's fine, but show me that. If the writers want to go down that path with the character, I'm fine with it. But maybe a show that has episodes that are on average 12 to 14 minutes long isn't the best place for that kind of character development. Maybe that kind of development is better explored over the course of a season or two, and not in 24 minutes. And don't get me wrong, I love stories like these. I love conflicted characters that start out on one side and end up on another. I love seeing that development, but we're not getting that here. We're not even approaching it. If you were thinking that Barriss feels like a totally different character here in Tales of the Empire from her appearance in Clone Wars Season 5, you're not wrong. She is a totally different character. Her motivations are different. Her outlook is completely different. She might as well be a totally new character introduced only in this show. The pacing for this show is also breakneck. I understand that the writers kind of have their hands tied with the episode length, but man, we are covering a lot of ground in these 3 episodes. In episode 4 of Tales of the Empire, Barriss goes from being released from her cell to being made a full member of the Inquisitors in what looks like 2 days. Maybe it's just me, but I always thought that the training and selection process for the Inquisitors, an elite military unit that takes its orders directly from Vader, would be a pretty long and grueling process, full of challenges that would test you physically and emotionally and morally. Even on its own, I would have guessed you would have needed months of training just to handle one of these lightsabers that only Inquisitors use. But now, apparently you can just blast through the whole process in about 2 days. Maybe I'm reading the pacing for episode 4 wrong. Maybe the selection process is a lot longer in episode, but I really don't think it is. And if it is, the writers don't do anything to show the passage of time here. I mean, put in a montage or something. Let's see her training with the new lightsaber. Do something to show that time is actually passing and this training is going on over a series of weeks or months. You don't have to rush this part. This training that Barriss undergoes, if you can even call it that, makes absolutely zero sense as well. I genuinely don't understand what the writers are going for with it. Barriss's final test to join the Inquisitors is to fight and kill another Jedi, or I guess I should say ex-Jedi. But what does this test prove exactly? Only that she's a better fighter than whoever this guy is. Her killing this random guy doesn't show that she's Inquisitor material. It just shows that she's willing to kill to survive, which you know, even Jedis will do if they have to. That's not a trait that's unique to the Inquisitors. That's like the trait of any living organism that feels their life is being threatened. I just want to point out here that Baris is already responsible for the deaths of several Jedi at this point. Some of them were even friends of hers. I'm not sure why she's having an attack of conscience with this one guy that's actually trying to kill her. I feel like the writers wanted this scene to be a real trial by fire scenario, you know? Where the winner would be tested not just physically, but also morally as well. Like, you have to kill this guy who was previously your friend to join the Inquisitors. But there's nothing like that here. The only thing this challenge proves is that whoever wins isn't afraid to kill. Which, you know, I'm guessing is the bare minimum you'd be required to be able to do as an Inquisitor. It's kind of a low bar for any candidate who wants to be an Inquisitor to clear. We don't learn anything new about Baris with this test either. We already know she's a killer. We've seen her kill plenty of people, a lot of them a lot less deserving than this guy. She wasn't at all wrong to kill this guy. It wasn't a morally ambiguous act, it was a pretty clear case of self-defense. This whole scene just makes me confused as to why she's suddenly so conflicted about taking a life. This is the person that carried out a terrorist bombing that killed a lot of people. Some of them were even friends of hers. Does that sound like the same person that we're seeing here in this scene? Did the writers just forget about this scene from season 5, when Baris was trying to kill Anakin when he discovered her plan? I'm not getting the impression she's holding back with him here at all. I'm getting it's a him or me vibe from this scene. And what are the Inquisitors expecting from these candidates anyway? I can understand the Grand Inquisitor trying to poach Force sensitives like Baris who have a history of hating the Jedi and who have maybe even killed a few of them. But these other guys, why would anyone assume they'd be good Inquisitors? And even if they do join up with the Empire, what makes you think they'd be okay with hunting down and slaughtering Jedi for Vader? How would you ever be sure they wouldn't just run at the first opportunity they got? This guy did. I'm thinking Inquisitor candidates need to be either politically aligned with the Empire and its goals and have close to or zero morality, or they need to have fallen to the dark side. Taking random Jedi and hoping fear of death will keep them on side isn't something that's going to work long term. Not with the nature of work that Inquisitors are expected to carry out. If you're not going to torture and brainwash the candidates into their role like in Jedi Fallen Order, and they're not loyal to the Empire, or haven't fallen to the dark side, then these candidates aren't going to work out. You know what would have been a really good test for an Inquisitor? You know, a task that would really weed out the people who are committed to this particular line of work. It would be something like killing an innocent. You know, like Anakin does with the younglings in Revenge of the Sith. That's what I would expect Inquisitor candidates to have to do during selection. What I'm saying is that they need to show commitment. And that brings me to the biggest, most glaring problem this show has. Why was Barriss Offee made into an Inquisitor when she so obviously doesn't want to be one? Every Inquisitor we've ever seen in Star Wars has been an unrepentant monster who has either gone about their work with a kind of cold, amoral indifference or a sense of malicious joy. How many times have you ever seen one of these guys show any apprehension about killing? In fact, when have you ever seen one of these guys uncomfortable with anything? This one in particular, she loves what she does. You see, I always thought that if you were Inquisitor, you had to be pretty committed to the Empire. It's not a role that you just enter into with doubts. I don't think Inquisitor is a mantle the Empire hands out to just anyone. I'm pretty sure you have to prove yourself before you're granted the role of second sister or third brother. I don't think that someone would be able to just make it to this level of Inquisitor and be as conflicted as Baris obviously is shown to be here in these first 2 episodes. How long do you think someone who is as deeply conflicted as Baris obviously is would last in a group as aggressively militant and violent as the Inquisitors? They kill practically indiscriminately. Innocent people, children, whoever. This guy literally flings his double-sided lightsaber down a corridor full of innocents and rebels. They weren't even in his way. He didn't give a shit. What do you think the Inquisitors would do to one of their own if they had even the slightest inkling that they weren't loyal or didn't believe in the cause? You can be a Jedi and have doubts all day long, and that's fine. The Jedi Order won't kill you for questioning things, but the Empire, and especially the Inquisitors, they're not going to tolerate someone in their ranks that's not a believer. Do you think any of these guys would tolerate working with someone who's worried about collateral damage or innocent lives? Hell no. There's no place in the Inquisitors for someone like that. And what's odd is that no Inquisitor notices how skeptical Baris is about the Empire or anything. They don't flag her unwillingness to kill when she was going through training. None of her behavior even warrants a side-eye from anyone. You know, maybe it's not such a good idea to let someone this conflicted be an Inquisitor. You know, in case they, I don't know, take issue with your slaughter of innocents while on a mission and do something crazy like bury a lightsaber in your back or force blast you off a cliff. I'm thinking an Inquisitor with doubts might be a really big liability to other Inquisitors. If it wasn't already pretty obvious to everyone that Baris had no allegiance to the Empire, I'm pretty sure at the very least Lynn should have started getting a little bit sus about her when she started talking about requesting aid to save the life of a Jedi. But even this doesn't raise any red flags. Baris has to outright state she's still a Jedi for Lynn to turn on her. This is Star Wars. Force sensitives can sense the emotional state of others, including other Force sensitives. They can feel when someone is hesitant or apprehensive or anxious. You know, all the feelings that Baris is giving off constantly since she was released from prison. I guess the writers just forgot that Force sensitives can do this stuff, because I'm pretty sure that if the Grand Inquisitor or really any of the Inquisitors picked up on these emotions from a candidate, let alone a fellow member of the Inquisitors, it would be instant curtains for them. In Jedi Fallen Order, Vader says that Seer would be a good Inquisitor because he can sense her hatred.
Such hatred. You would have made an excellent Inquisitor.
That kind of seems like it's a requirement for the role. I wonder what Vader picked up from Barriss when they were in the same room together at the end of episode 4. I guess the writers for Tales of the Empire also forgot that in Jedi Survivor it was shown that Inquisitors could take a Padawan, even one with no reverence or attraction to the dark side or the Empire, and break them down through torture and brainwashing and build them back up into an Inquisitor. Maybe that's something the Inquisitors could have done with Barriss when they could obviously see she was skeptical and apprehensive about killing. Oh yeah, but then this technique for creating Inquisitors was established in a video game, and that was another writer's idea. And well, we all know how Dave feels about other writers' contributions to the canon, so I guess we can just go ahead and ignore Jedi Fallen Order so this whole story arc that Barriss goes through makes sense. You know, up front, I feel bad for anyone who was hoping for an interaction between Barriss and Vader in this series. That could have been really interesting, considering their shared history and the new roles they currently find themselves in. You're never going to get that scene now. Anyway, let's skip to the last episode, and Barriss is old now and living out in this remote area. She's helping Force-sensitive kids and their families escape from the Empire. But guess who comes a-knocking one day? It's Lynn, her old Inquisitor buddy, who's hunting a Force-sensitive child. Barriss buys the family time to escape by trying to talk Lynn down. And what's interesting here about this scene is that Barriss is surprised that Lynn is fine with kidnapping Force-sensitive children for the Empire. And I mean, I don't know why she'd be surprised about that. Lynn killed an entire group of townspeople in front of her just because one of them lied to her. I don't know why she'd be surprised about anything Lynn would ever go on to do after that. But anyway. Lynn tries to cut down Barriss, but she uses the same dodge technique that the Inquisitor used on her years ago, and I guess this is supposed to represent growth or development of some kind? I really don't know. Anyway, before Lynn follows the family into the cave system they're fleeing through, Barriss tells her that she'll only be able to leave the cave if she knows the path, otherwise she'll die in there. Lynn follows them in anyway, but the family still manages to escape. And then we get one of the most confusing scenes in this show. Lynn can't find her way out of the cave, just like Barriss said, and she just starts to lose it. She loses all composure and just starts hammering at the walls with her saber. And what's kind of odd about this scene is the way it's shot. It feels like Lynn has only been in the cave for like a really short amount of time. Again, it might be a much longer amount of time in episode, but there's nothing on screen that lets you know how much time has passed. So you can be forgiven for thinking she was only in the cave for 5 minutes, which is what I thought the first time I saw it. Now, to be fair, there is a transition used right after the family escapes that cuts back to Lynn, which you can say conveys some amount of time has passed. A similar transition was used in episode 4 after Barriss is told about Order 66 by the guards, but here it's not obvious how much actual time is passing because there isn't really any visual clue provided to us when she's in the cave. Here's a shot from just before Lynn enters the cave, and here's the shot, spoiler, when she exits. These shots could have been taken maybe an hour apart, and before anyone shouts at me in the comments and says, the second shot obviously conveys it's morning as it's brighter. That's true, it could convey that. It could also convey that the storm that was rolling in when Lynn arrived has passed as well. I could even get all film school about it and say that the storm was a metaphor for Lynn's anger and hatred and fear, and now that she's left all that aside, the quieter sunny landscape we see is a metaphor for the inner peace she now has. There, you didn't think of that, did you? You prick. But in all seriousness, I do think the storm just passed and this is actually the same day. There's one transition to outside of the cave that happens towards the end of the episode that just seems to be there to show that the storm has passed, which would indicate that no real amount of time has passed. Anyway, back on point. While Lynn is freaking out and hammering at the walls with her saber, Barriss reaches out to her to help, only for Lynn to turn around and stab her. And this is where things start to get even more confusing because Lynn is actually sorry about this. That's right guys, Lynn, the character who slaughtered a town's worth of people, who kills Jedi without question, who has probably killed countless people since we last saw her. Totally amoral Lynn pulls a complete about face and starts to forsake the dark side and the Empire because she got lost in a cave for 5 minutes, at most maybe half a day. Now she's cradling Barriss like she's some long lost friend and not someone she was trying to kill just a few minutes ago. Barriss then dies in Lynn's arms, with Lynn vowing to bring her out of the cave. This is also kind of an odd thing for Lynn to say here. I mean, we just saw Baris take her last breath. I'm pretty sure she's dead. Wow. Just wow. I guess I shouldn't be surprised with this right turn to the light from Lynn after everything else I've seen in the last 3 episodes. Now again, to be fair, I don't want to admit anything. Lynn does imply before she stabs Baris that the Empire will probably kill her for failing, and that would have definitely contributed to her mental state in this scene. But, on the face of it, she looks to have been an Inquisitor for a long time, and we've seen her fail before, and she wouldn't even be the first Inquisitor to fail to capture a Jedi or a Force sensitive. So I'll be generous and I'll say it's at least plausible, and I'll stress that word plausible, that she might react like this in these circumstances. But from what I've seen with Inquisitors, they can and often do fail to complete their missions. And a lot of the time they just get either another chance to complete it or just get assigned another mission. I'm not saying that there aren't consequences for failing. Sometimes it does mean death. But I don't think Vader's going to cut you in half for failing to bring in this one no-name Force sensitive. Also, another thing, the way Baris gets stabbed, why was she standing within range of Lynn swinging her blade around? That seems really foolish. Why would she stand within arm's length of someone who's waving a weapon around and who's also having a meltdown? And she doesn't even try to dodge like she did outside when she was fighting Lynn, which makes me think she just wasn't expecting to get stabbed. Just a really baffling decision on behalf of the writers to play this scene out like this. So there you have it, guys, the story of Barriss Offee, all the way from Jedi Padawan to unrepentant terrorist to Inquisitor trainee for a day to sainted healer and all-around hero, right up to her death, but probably not really. I hope it was worth the wait. So a lot to unpack with this 3-episode arc. This was a total mess, and again another waste of a totally good Star Wars story idea. Just absolutely squandered like Ahsoka and Kenobi before that and Book of Boba Fett before that, and it's always for the same old reason. The writing is just awful. And what's especially annoying about Tales of the Empire is that you could have made a way more interesting story with Baris if you'd kept her on the villain path. This redemption arc was totally unnecessary, and to make this story work, the writers had to stomp all over Barris's character development from Season 5, an actual good storyline. No one was expecting a redemption arc for Barriss Offee, and no one wanted to see one for this character either. I'm not sure why Disney feels the need to redeem so many of their morally grey and evil characters. We've seen this done before, and it's been done too many times already. And it's not like the writers even had an interesting redemption arc to tell with this character either. Any of the character development you'd associate with a redemption story like this is totally absent here. How did Baris pull herself out of the darkness that motivated her into committing the Jedi Temple bombing? Don't know, never explained. Off-screen development. When did she pull herself out of that darkness? Was it when she was imprisoned? Or in that time jump between episodes 5 and 6? Don't know, never explained. Off-screen development. When did Baris realize she was wrong for carrying out the Jedi Temple bombing? Don't know, never explained. Off-screen development. So yeah, there you have it. This story, a total miss. 2 out of 10 stars, would not recommend. And just not to end on a bad note, forcing myself to say something nice. Great to see the Grand Inquisitor back again, voiced by Jason Isaacs. That's always a treat. And the animation is as usual brilliant. Can't fault that. The animation is always fantastic in these shows. So what did you think of Barris's story? Were you happy with it? Be honest now, don't lie. I know you weren't happy with it, but sound off in the comments below anyway. Like, share, subscribe, and all that jazz. And as always, thanks for watching.